been thinking about what if you really did have to stop, say, like these Garan 2 drones, what would you do? And I think it would be swarms of counter drones. I don't know. Again, this is something to keep a very close eye on.
Yeah, I mean, the Ukraine war has shown that, especially with these suicide drones that Russia is using against Ukraine, they've been very, very effective, because you, as a country, you don't know whether to shoot them down. And number one, if you shoot them down, you're wasting rockets. First of all, you're wasting ammunition. Secondly, you got to compare the price it costs for the drone and the price it costs for the rockets. It's all about economics. War is economics. You got to make sure you do more damage to your opponent in a cheaper way. So if you're using a $10,000 drone and this rocket costs $100,000, but you are still winning economically, because it doesn't matter if they shoot down the drone, you can replace that with 9 others for the same price. So it's come to a point where, and also if you shoot down a drone, you're also giving away your position as well. So if you're an anti-aircraft missile and you shoot down a drone, you're easily giving away your position, and then you're a target. Secondly, these drones, you've seen in Ukraine where you see officers and police officers and army units are trying to shoot them down with their machine guns. So they don't know whether to shoot them down with missiles, or they don't know whether to shoot them down with machine guns. Absolutely scary. And imagine, this is just 1 or 2 drones that Russia is using. But imagine if there's thousands swarming across your city, and the havoc they would cause. You would not have enough missiles to take them all down, first of all. And secondly, the amount of havoc, and if all of these drones have got onboard missile systems, they'll be taking down military units and armored vehicles and anti-aircraft units. You could literally, if you can do this well, you can take over Taiwan with 0 losses, human losses, if China can kind of do that well. But I think we're still a few years away from that. But I think definitely, like you said, they've got the capability to produce these at a very large scale. And yeah, it's quite interesting to see, actually. I think this is definitely the way we're going. They call it the 4th industrial revolution, and the 4th industrial revolution is all about drone warfare and also augmentation. Yeah, have you read about the 4th industrial revolution, Brian? It's about soldiers.
That is a mix of different economic concepts. I do believe how it would impact military, because they're talking about like distributed manufacturing, AI, like designing systems and things like that. I think we would have to kind of focus on that. Could be a focus for an upcoming episode, because there's so much. But just think about China, their industrial capacity just to manufacture, but also their capacity to research, develop, and for the product, before you start manufacturing, manufacturing something. So I mean, they have the advantage. If drone warfare is the future, then China definitely has the advantage. And again, this is something that the U.S. is just, they have no way of leveling this playing field, because they're just outnumbered. And the best way would be to accept a balance of power among nations and to cooperate and compete in a healthy way, but they just can't. So they'll have to learn the hard way, unfortunately.
Sure. Now we're coming up to the second part of the show, and this video has been around for a long time, and I made a video to make fun out of it. But I want to kind of quickly go over it with you. And these are supposed to be some of the most intelligent think tanks the United States has. And I did some research on this team, and this team was managed by Victoria Nuland. So you can imagine, what kind of people are behind it. And these are think tanks which actually tell the U.S. leadership what to do, and they advise the current administration. It's quite scary how they advise them, because these guys literally have no clue. I'm not going to go through the whole video. I'll just take in certain aspects, and I'll probably go to the parts where it's important, but rest of it I'll just skim through it. What I'll do is. So this is the team, by the way. And first of all, you have a think tank wearing a pink uniform. I mean, can anyone actually take this guy seriously?
Well, I won't judge them based on how they're dressed. But I will say is that a lot of these people, in a way, though, it does kind of reflect how disconnected they are from reality. It kind of manifests itself in the way they present themselves. They have what is their background? I think they might have had like this entire segment. They might have had one or two people who are ever in the military, but most of them never served in the military. So what do they know about warfare? I just don't
exactly.
get it.
And these guys actually genuinely giving advice to the administration, and it's quite scary the kind of stuff they come up with. I think this is the only guy who actually speaks sense, and he's got military background, but the rest of them are pretty useless. And the things they say as well, this lady. I'm not even going to start with this lady. This lady's suggestion. I mean, there's two teams, right? There's one team which is the Chinese team, and the other team is the US, and she's part of the Chinese team. And at one point she talks about China releasing nukes as a warning shot.
Yeah. Or I think they suggested taking out American bases in Okinawa and Guam as their starting move. Why would you ever do that? Because this is an internal affair. Unless the United States was already somehow directly involved, why would you launch a first strike against the United States? So again, it's something like this is an exercise in rattling the public's cage, really, just to scare them about China. Sure. Just another excuse to scare them in regards to China, portray them as violent, irrational, unpredictable, when in reality they have been beyond patient this entire time against numerous blatant provocations from the United States.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see what they say as well. Can you hear that? Can you hear it, by the way?
Before they get out, because otherwise we know exactly where they're going, which is toward Taiwan to start shooting at us.
By hitting them in the ports, you are guaranteeing that Japan is going to enter the conflict. Not sure that we can.
Would you rather take the American military station in Japan out to the greatest degree possible and have Japan enter the conflict, or let it steam toward Taipei, attack us, and have Japan maybe stay out of the conflict? Those are the two options.
You're going to attack Japan?
We are going to attack U.S. facilities on Japan. So U.S. air bases and U.S. ports that the U.S. uses in Japan. We are not yet going after Japanese air bases.
Part of this is communicating. You're not just taking on this little, rogue island that you see as your own, Taiwan. You're taking on the United States, Japan, Australia.
I'm sort of in the camp of let's be as aggressive as possible, short of launching a preemptive strike, if that makes sense.
Regardless of which course of action the Chinese Red Team takes here, if we are prepared for the bigger fight, the potential large strike campaign, we are better off than if we assume that there's going to be a blockade or a lower level fight and then suddenly find ourselves in a much bigger war.
The insight that comes from this is you have to have a peacetime posture that allows you to be prepared to deter on day zero and fight if deterrence doesn't work.
All right, Stacey, high level
here. This is really funny.
What just happened with Move 1?
China's invaded Taiwan. It began by attacking Taiwan's outlying islands near the mainland. Then it followed it with a large air and missile strike on Taiwan and on U.S. bases in Japan and on U.S. bases in Guam and the Northern Marianas. In response to that, the United States followed up with bomber attacks on on Chinese ships in port, and there was an air battle over Taiwan where American aircraft flying from the Philippines came in and engaged in combat with Chinese aircraft that were trying to bomb Taiwan.
So after Move 1, can you assess which team is winning?
I think it's a stalemate right now. China has strategically blundered by pulling Japan in, and the United States is still well positioned to defend, but China also has a lot of its assets left and has a lot of power that it can apply.
Can you pause it for just a moment?
This is absolutely hilarious. Go on,
So
Brian.
they're talking about like dogfights over Taiwan. Look at what's going on in Ukraine right now. Russia is not, flying their aircraft over Ukraine right now because Ukraine has air defense systems. Taiwan has air defense systems. They might not be the best in the world, but they have them. China's not going to be flying their warplanes over Taiwan. They have a huge missile arsenal. If it ever came down to this, huge missile arsenal. Their multiple launch rocket systems are so long range and precise they could hit anything on Taiwan. And their air defense systems, their integrated air defense systems can hit the shortest range missiles that they have, for say their S-400 systems, could cover the entire strait and parts of the island. The longer range missiles can cover everything on the island and beyond. So they don't need to have their aircraft flying around Taiwan. If the United States were to send aircraft anywhere near that theater of operation, they would risk being shot down by China's integrated air defense system. Just to put that, how unrealistic all of this is, and the idea of China starting out by hitting U.S. bases, guaranteeing that they would intervene. You don't know that they're going to intervene. If you created a blockade around Taiwan, you would leave it for the United States to draw first blood and make it abundantly clear to the whole world why you're sinking their fleet, which China has the ability to do. It makes no sense.
It beggars belief what kind of people we're dealing with here, man. And these are the people who are actually giving advice to the government. And secondly, they said that they are launching flights from the Philippines. First of all, we don't even know if the Philippines will want to be involved, and I don't think there is a
I don't think that there is there. Because the last time I checked, the Philippines have been and are trying to keep the United States, its military, as far away from the Philippines as possible. There might be like some sort of presence the U.S. has because they like to invite themselves in and never leave. But I don't think that they have any. And I know they're trying to, and this is the whole thing. They're not trying to create a military presence across the region to make it more secure. They're doing it specifically to destabilize the entire region. Every country in the region, including Japan and South Korea, count China as their largest export market.
Yeah, I mean, this video is out in the public. So imagine if any Filipino people were looking at this video, or Philippine leaders were looking at this video and thinking, bloody hell, we didn't sign up for this. I mean, what do you think will happen to Philippines if US starts launching, airplanes from Philippines to attack Chinese interests? Obviously, Philippines was going to be a target. So there is no way the Philippines would agree to this. And they will probably be looking at this video absolutely crapping themselves, thinking, "Oh God, the United States is bringing us into a conflict and they didn't even tell us."
And that's the thing. That's the thing. The U.S. wants to get all of Southeast Asia involved in this, and Southeast Asia wants nothing to do with it, which is why the United States, in addition to all of its provocations against China through Taiwan, they're also funding anti-government movements across the entire region, trying to overthrow governments in Southeast Asia to install client regimes that will invite the U.S. military in and turn the entire region into a battlefield, destroying the collective economies of Asia, so that the U.S. can maintain hegemony over everyone. This is what's going on, and it's look at Ukraine from 2014 onward. That is an example of the U.S. installing a regime into power that then the country self-destructed because of that client regime, because it was serving U.S. interests rather than the interests of the people in the actual country. And they're trying to do the same thing all across Southeast Asia, in the Philippines, here in Thailand, in Myanmar, in Cambodia, in Malaysia, in Indonesia. They're trying to do this across the entire region. It's extremely disruptive, and again, it's indicative of who is actually the real threat to peace and prosperity.
That's right. And there is no way the Chinese would attack Japan or South Korea as a first strike. It doesn't make any sense to bring more enemies into this conflict. I mean, the most China would do is just blockade Taiwan, and they will stop all supplies going in, and eventually they will cave in. They will be like, Taiwan will be like, okay, we surrender, because they know they don't have a chance, and the West is not going to get involved, because if they come anywhere near, there's going to be huge escalation. So it's going to be a very much I think China will want it happen as peacefully as possible. There is no way they would start blowing up Japan. And
one more thing before we go, if you're going to go through any more of this, just imagine if they did the same thing about Russia and Ukraine before it happened. It would be the same as saying, well, the first thing Russia will do is carry out missile strikes on Poland and Romania and who else? Who else could they launch a preemptive strike again? Maybe some U.S. military bases across Europe. No, they didn't. They didn't need to, and neither does China.
Exactly. All right, let me play the rest of it. It gets funnier.
China went with a very, very aggressive strike campaign against U.S. forces and bases throughout the region.
The gloves are off, if you will. I mean, by attacking U.S. territory of Guam, killing Americans, the Chinese have crossed the line. I think they've also miscalculated already that they took some actions against U.S. forces in Japan that they thought would maybe prevent Japan from coming in. It actually drew Japan in. Same with Australia. How do we prevent the Chinese force that's trying to get across the Strait of Taiwan to actually be able to successfully land and start taking Taiwanese territory?
Now this is just a matter of getting as many things into the fight as we can, as quickly as possible. Getting the Australians involved in a blockade and checking out what's in the strait with the Marine Littoral Regiment subs, relying on our allies to watch the rear and maintain supply lines and maybe implement a blockade while we're fighting in the strait, in and around the straits with Taiwan.
We believe the longer this takes, the less able we will be able to achieve our objectives. And so we are in the course of this building in fallback positions, although we don't want to tell that to the other team. Move 2 is building on all of that and moving forward to land on Taiwan, to further try to take out American assets in the region, and also to go after Japan, which has entered the war.
The fact that they aggressively hit Guam and Japan was frankly just a very quick way to make sure our allies were all in. And now we have Japanese resources willing to contribute to air and undersea. We have Australians willing to contribute and others coming on board.
My sense is that we need to at least take out the airfields in northern Australia. So at least try to.
So like Darwin and Tyndall?
Darwin and Tyndall. The fuel tanks are very important because that's how those planes get refueled. And the runways are important because they need somewhere to take off.
In Hawaii, you have both obviously American territory, which they seek to preserve, plus you have all of the naval and air assets that the Americans have dispersed back that way once this war started. So there's a lot of targets out there. They hit our ports in China. We're going to take the fight to Hawaii.
I'm a little bit hesitant to use conventional kinetic attacks in Hawaii just because I feel that will be interpreted as a Pearl Harbor in the United States.
Oh, really?
Which would galvanize significant U.S. support.
China's big strike, which was in response to the U.S. Attacking its ports, was on Hawaii. And they launched their stealth bombers, which launched cruise missiles and hypersonic weapons against Hawaii. It took out the command center on Hickam Air Force Base, where they're controlling Blue Air Forces and commanding the air war. So an American state has now been attacked.
What was the blue team's move?
The blue team was focused on destroying China's big warships that provide a lot of air defense for the invasion fleet. So they had submarines within the strait. I would say right now the red team is ahead. They're starting to make progress towards their objective of actually gaining control over Taiwanese territory. But they have a long, hard slog in front of them.
After move 1, you said we were at a stalemate. After move 2, what would you say?
I would say that China has a slight advantage right now because it's actually ashore. So it has made progress towards achieving its objective. It still has a long way to go. But both sides are probably running low of some of the key missiles and munitions that they use. So the character of the fight might change going forward.
All right.
Okay.
On the move.
Okay. So let's talk about a shortage of weapons and ammunition. The U.S. already has that because they're waging a proxy war against Russia and Ukraine.
Exactly.
Then they think they're going to then move on to fight China with the largest industrial base on Earth, and they think somehow they're going to be able to do that and even come close to matching the ability for China to reconstitute its forces, resupply its forces in its own territory. It's insane, and this is why when you listen to something like this, it's hard to tell whether they're this dumb or this is all just solely for public consumption. China's going to attack Hawaii, China, because it really paints China out as violent, evil, and a threat to the United States. People think when they introduced this in the beginning, they introduced Taiwan as it's some innocent country that China's bullying, and they don't really fully explain the reality that even the U.S. recognizes Taiwan as part of one China. They don't make that clear deliberately. And then for China to attack Hawaii, I mean, what is this? Is a step-by-step direct war with the United States when it didn't have to involve the U.S. at all, and the U.S. would have to be the aggressor as always, and then be at the disadvantage because of it. Chinese decision makers would have to be completely disconnected from reality to do anything even resembling this strategy that they laid out.
Exactly. And again, you can see the Philippines getting bombed, and they didn't even mention anything about Philippines being bombed. They're more interested about Hawaii being bombed, and they didn't even mention Japan and Australia. Exactly. The fact that little Philippines is being bombed, they didn't even say, "Oh, poor Philippines." They even completely missed that out. And yeah, it doesn't make any sense for China to actively start, hitting Hawaii, U.S. bases like in Guam as well, because at the end of the day, it just doesn't make any sense, because that is an attack to U.S. territory, and obviously that would push everyone behind a war with China, and this is just going to escalate the conflict even more. It doesn't make any sense.
It's completely, the things that they're saying are completely childish. No adult who is even remotely interested in geopolitics and military matters, even just have a passing interest in it, would think any of this was viable.
Exactly. So the final bit is the most funniest bit. I literally fell off my seat. I fell off my seat when
right now. That means that the U.S. or the West would back down. I wonder if we could do a hemp shot not over but near where most of the U.S. forces are, because that would be clear signaling to them that we are serious about using nuclear weapons. But obviously, wouldn't want it right over in this area at this point.
So you're saying a demonstration explosion?
Yeah, at higher altitude.
And is this a bluff, or are we really willing to use nuclear weapons?
I think that depends on folks in the room, but I think in a no-kidding Taiwan scenario, if we are really facing the prospect of defeat, we should be willing to use nuclear weapons. It might not be nuclear weapons on Taiwan. It could be a tactical nuke against invading U.S. or intervening U.S. forces.
A real big weakness is our inability to contest or threaten China's air superiority. We keep trying, but the difficulty is in our dispersed posture with limited access to tankers. We're not able to push enough tactical aviation forward over Taiwan to really maintain persistent air superiority or even just contest Chinese air superiority.
I think the key insight already in this game is if you have not spent years preparing for this, pre-positioning munitions, getting the Taiwanese ready, pre-positioning your own forces, developing your dispersal bases. If you haven't spent years preparing for this, then you're going to be behind the 8 ball the whole way. How about putting a bunch of SEALs on the island? via submarines and try to support the Marines.
The biggest concern is that the United States will come roaring back with everything it has, not over a short period of time, but a long period of time. We have calculated that America's in and America's in. But there may be gradations of what it means for America to fight our country. And we have seen time and time again, once the enraged bull elephant is fully stirred, its ability to make war and to generate the resources to make war is unbelievably large. The only thing the Americans seem to declare defeat on is really, really long wars, not short violence. Afghanistan, Iraq, wherever they wanted to go home, Vietnam, they wanted to go home. They get tired, but they don't get scared.
I think experience has shown that this bridgehead here, just like in Ukraine, it's not going to be over in a few days unless Taiwan capitulates.
If you watched what happened in Ukraine, you know, the actions that were taken before the invasion were important, but so is continued resupply. With Ukraine, you have borders that you can move things across. Taiwan's a long ways off.
So here we are after move 3. The blue team, the United States, seemed to try to do what it could to make command and control more difficult in the actual invasion itself of Taiwan and all of that. China and the red team wanted to send more of a message to the United States, attempting to strike Alaska and California, San Diego specifically, plus Hawaii again. So
the Chargers
everywhere,
not the Chargers.
A nuclear test by China to essentially make the United States take the nuclear option more seriously.
Oh my God.
So where are we now?
Things spiraled really quickly. The headline is the nuclear test, which is unprecedented since World War II. We haven't seen limited nuclear use, certainly during combat. We don't know where things go from here. There were also the attempted strikes on the United States. China has continued to reinforce its lodgment on Taiwan, but it's still very small and it's heavily contested. The U.S. is pushing in some of its ships now that munition stockpiles have gone down to try to support them. And it looks like we're in for a long, hard fight.
So best case scenario is that it's a ground war in Taiwan. Worst case scenario is we're starting to have some nuclear exchanges.
Yes. China still has its intercontinental ballistic missiles that are nuclear armed, but it also has the ones that can range Guam and sort of this area that it could use, which have nuclear warheads.
Well, there are a lot of lessons to take away from this. This was fascinating, and I can't wait to get to the lessons learned portion when we do that in a little bit.
Go ahead, Brian. I mean, I wish this was a parody, but it's not a parody.
It's not. And you know, if you follow these think tanks, these are the people that are cited across the Western media, taken seriously across the Western media, and these are think tanks that are funded by the U.S. government to help generate policy and doctrines. It's incredibly scary that they're like little children. Again, all China would have to do is, and they're already doing this without even having to use a blockade. They're putting pressure, economic pressure on Taiwan because half of Taiwan's exports go to the rest of China, and their biggest industries are completely dependent on China for the rest of China for raw materials. So all they have to do is just put some pressure on that, and everything in on the island collapses. And people really have no choice. And the people responsible for it, the DPP, the Democratic Progressive Party that the U.S. installed into power, people are going to blame them for it, and they're going to want to get rid of them. And they're going to want to, before the DPP came along, very gradual, slow, incremental, mutually beneficial integration was already taking place, and it was going to continue, and the U.S. disrupted it because they're out of time. They knew that if everything being as it is left alone, it would have worked in China's favor, and it still will. So this whole thing, this is their dream. This is their dream. If China makes every decision is the wrong decision, and they could justify some kind of war. But did you hear that part where he thinks this is World War II, and when the U.S. decides to go to war, they really go to war. You've woken up the elephant or whatever he was talking about. This isn't World War II where you're up against numerically, countries with populations smaller than you. and countries with smaller industrial bases than you. This is China that has 4 or 5 times more people and a larger industrial base than you do. So I don't know how they're figuring that. I don't know where that comes from.
It's funny to see that little Asian woman who was suggesting nuking, sending a nuke near the United States.
Well, she learned a new word, hemp shot, and she wanted to use the word hemp shot to sound like she's a military expert.
Yeah,
and so I think that's what tempted her to roll that out.
Yeah, and the female host here, she said China's going to send a nuclear test near American shores. I mean, come on, if that isn't going to start a nuclear war, I mean, there is no point even sending an invasion force from United States all the way to Taiwan. You might as well just throw nuclear weapons at, all of Taiwan, all of China. It's just there is no point having a war anymore. If the first country that throws a nuclear weapon, the first country that throws a nuclear weapon, and that's it. That's the end of the world. There's no point planning anything after that. There's going to be a huge nuclear exchange, and that's it. It's going to be the end. Nobody wins in a nuclear war. And it's funny how these guys, the female is saying, "Oh, China's going to send a test near American shores." If you're in a war situation, there is no test. You either fire a nuclear missile or you don't.
Again, everything about this is it's hard to tell whether they're really this ignorant or they're designing all of this just to prey on the ignorance of the public. Because I think a lot of people in the public, I've heard people talk about how dangerous China is, how their military is a big threat to everyone, and they've got this or that they said or they're going to do, and they buy into it, and it's because of propaganda like this. So in that sense, they're very successful. They may not be winning over people that even casually look into geopolitics and military matters, but the overall general public, maybe they're swayed by this. I can't tell you how many people fall for this. Even people who are aware of what's going on in Ukraine still fall for this. They still buy into this type of propaganda. So I guess that's kind of what our job is. Our job is to try to accelerate the process of people seeing through these lies so that they understand the situation around Taiwan as well as they're beginning to understand the situation around Ukraine. Because the faster that happens, the shorter the window of opportunity is for the U.S. to exploit people's ignorance and get yet another war of aggression going somewhere else in the world that's going to destroy everybody's lives involved.
Exactly. Somebody said, Hung Chua said she's Taiwanese, and it makes sense. And this is exactly what's happening in Ukraine. You have Zelensky and his cronies trying to escalate the war to bring in the West, to bring in NATO, to bring in the United States. And they're even talking about nuclear exchange as well. And I think if she's Taiwanese, then it makes sense for her to do that, to escalate the war, escalate a nuclear exchange, because she will probably want to see China being completely destroyed, and this is the only way to do it. So it makes sense why she would say something like that.
Yeah, I want to make a point here about the type of people on Taiwan, on this island of Taiwan, that the U.S. is maneuvering into positions of power and influence, and including in their think tanks and everything. These are people they pick specifically because they don't understand how anything works, and they want to feed their ego. They want money. They want influence. They want exposure, and they're willing to go along with anything to get it. That's why they pick these people, not because they're knowledgeable about anything. Because there's a lot of people on Taiwan who are very reasonable, who understand that this is not in their best interest. This has nothing to do with freedom and democracy, and the U.S. is our ally. They know that. And a lot of the smartest people on Taiwan, they're doing business with mainland China, the rest of China. They're doing business with them. That's where the best and brightest of Taiwan. That's what they're doing, and they're trying their best to avoid this and buy time, so that this danger created by Washington passes without any of this even having to be contemplated. Like again, in Beijing, they're not thinking about, oh yes, ideally we would like to wage war and take Taiwan by force. No, ideally they would want to go back to the period of time before 2016 when the DP and before 2014 when the U.S. was stirring things up politically on Taiwan. They want to go back to that period of time where gradual incremental reintegration was taking place, because that's what was happening. That's what was in everybody's best interest. And only now, and look at what they're talking about. They're talking about nukes and what do you think this is going to do to Taiwan if this actually ever happens? Even the scenario that you and I, AJ, we were talking about earlier, what realistically China might do if it decided to use military force, that is going to completely destroy Taiwan, just like Ukraine is being destroyed right now. Who benefits from that? Not anyone on the mainland, not anyone on the island. Only Washington benefits. Chinese people killing Chinese people, just like Slavs killing Slavs in Eastern Europe.
Frankie Boy has mentioned, notice the drop in recruitment. And it sounds to me that United States, they know that they don't have the recruitment numbers to fight a real major war. So what they're using is they're using these countries like Ukraine, fighting till the last Ukrainian. And with China, they'll probably fight till the last Japanese, the last South Korean, the last Australian, even probably the last Philippines, and just fight from a distance, try and hit Chinese trade routes, try and block the Malacca Strait, try and use subs. And I think that's probably going to be, because you would think that the people who are in charge of the United States administration, they're probably not that clever, but the people in the military are probably a lot more cleverer than what you have running the country. And I'm not talking about General Milley. I think he's just a face, but the people who kind of, I think he's just somebody put in place just to kind of send out this woke agenda or something. But the actual people who actually run the military, the leaders of the Navy, Air Force, I think they would probably question anything they're asked to do. They'll be like, no, we're not doing this. This is the way to do it. And I think it'll be quite different. I think United States would use other lives first rather than their own, and not do something stupid like send an aircraft carrier.
Point. Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point. And there are a lot of capable people in the U.S. military who I think have been saying no to one administration after the other. There's a continuity of agenda, so it's not really pinning it on one administration or the other. I'm just saying that there have been points in recent American history where I think they would have liked to have done something regarding Iran or something more regarding Russia. People in the military said no. But that's why those people don't really get promoted, and people like Milley do. People like Petraeus end up getting promoted and getting appointed to all these different positions because they're yes men. They'll agree to anything because they're just trying to advance their own career and their own retirement plan. Their plans for retirement. They're nice, cushy job at one of these think tanks that push these type of policies out. So it's a scary time. Luckily, for the time being, Russia and China are being patient. They're weathering a lot of, I would even say, humiliation at the hands of the West, but because they know in the long run, it's going to come out in their favor, and we all just have to keep doing our part to wake people up, and to resist, to speak out against this and resist it, to explain to people what's really going on, because the Western media isn't, and you can see how dangerous these lies are and the type of direction society is put in because of these lies.
Exactly. We're coming up to 2-hour figure. So let's finish up by talking a final thing about Ukraine. The last I heard that Russia is building up its force. They're obviously clearing up Kherson. All the civilians are being asked to evacuate. Looks like there's going to be a massive war in Kherson. Same thing that happened in Donbass. And I don't see it go any other way apart from a huge Russian victory here. And I can see more lives being lost in Ukraine. And I think once Russia takes over Kherson, do you think they will head all the way to Odessa? Because Odessa seems to be a flashpoint for Russia, because from Odessa there has been a lot of attacks into Crimea. Obviously, the latest one was in Sevastopol. Do you think Odessa would be next in the crosshairs, or do you think Russia will just sit back and wait for Ukraine to implode, and which they will pretty soon? What do you think?
Okay, I will get into Ukraine. I need a really short intermission here because I was drinking a ton of coffee this whole time.
Oh yeah,
can you
sure.
maybe explain where people can find your work and my work,
Yeah.
and then I will be right
No
back.
problem. No problem.
My apologies.
Yeah. So guys, if you want to find Brian, he's on the description. His website, his YouTube, and his Telegram. And if you want to find me, all the stuff is there. Don't forget to like and share, help the algorithm. We have reached over 1,000 viewers, which is great. We are doing something brand new. I think a lot of people are probably bored listening to Ukraine all the time. So we are doing something very much about the military. Obviously, Brian used to be in the military, so he's got a wealth of knowledge about the military. So I thought it would be something educational for you guys to discuss the Chinese military, because not many channels discuss it, because not many channels know about it. A lot of the Western channels I see about the military are very one-sided, pro-West. A lot of them still believe that Russia is losing, Ukraine is still winning, so you can't really believe anything you see. So if you really want to hear the real stuff, this is the channel to follow. So yeah, I am getting a lot more guests on board. Tomorrow I've got a very special guest, to keep a lookout for that. A very special guest tomorrow. He is a superstar. He was in Redacted a few days ago. He's going to be a very, very special guest. I'm not going to say exactly who. I'm going to leave it for a surprise. But yeah, you'll be absolutely amazed by that guest. But he was on Redacted a few days ago, so keep an eye out for that. Yeah, Brian, I was just saying that I've got this really special guest coming on tomorrow, and actually, I wanted to keep his name secret, but I'm probably gonna say it's Lucas Gage. I don't know if you know him. He was an ex-military guy, and he's recently come on board. And he was on Redacted, the channel, a few days ago. And obviously he's speaking out against the Ukraine war, and he served 2 military tours in Iraq as well. And yeah, he's very much like yourself. He knows a lot about what's going on, and he used to be in the military, and he's really is fed up of the way the United States is going about its business. And it'd be really good to talk to him. So he's coming on tomorrow. So it'd be really good to kind of catch up with him. So yeah, over back to you, Brian. You were talking about Ukraine.
So the situation in Ukraine right now, you're looking at the front line, and it's more or less stable. There's obviously fighting taking place along it. You have Ukraine doing reconnaissance in force, or what appears to be reconnaissance in force. This is where they're attacking different Russian defenses along the line to try to ascertain the disposition of Russian forces. They suffer huge losses doing this, and they're getting ready. Everyone seems to agree. They're getting ready for another big push toward Kherson. Russia is getting ready for it as well, supposedly building up their defenses around the city on the west bank of the Dnieper River, and also evacuating the civilian population to the east bank. What is going to happen here? I don't know. So far, Russian forces have stopped every single offensive Ukraine has launched around Kherson. Whichever way it goes, whether Russian forces keep the city or leave, Ukrainian forces are going to lose huge amounts of men and equipment that they cannot replace. I just went over the last $400 million U.S. aid package, and most of the items on the package are refurbishments. They're large amounts of equipment that the U.S. is paying to refurbish and then send to Ukraine. So they're out of existing inventory items to send to Ukraine. So this is an indicator that Western support for Ukraine is dwindling. And some people say, well, Brian, that's just the U.S. The U.S. by far has been sending the most equipment, the most ammunition, the most everything to Ukraine. Everyone else has been sending tiny amounts by comparison. And so if the US is running out of equipment and ammunition to send Ukraine, then so is everyone else, or they already have long ago. What is Ukraine going to do after they launch this? However it turns out, they might get a brief political victory, or it might just get crushed. And then what? What do they do? Where are they replacing their trained manpower with? What are they going to replace all these heavy weapons they're going to lose? I don't know. I saw a video, and you cannot confirm these things, but they had these light armored vehicles all lined up, where instead they should have had tanks, but they don't have any more tanks to send in those type of numbers. So this is the situation Ukraine's in. Russia is more than well aware of this. They're playing the long game. They are more than willing to trade territory to save the lives of their men and their heavy equipment. They know that whatever territory they lose, this is in the long game, temporary. They will get it back. That goes for Kharkov as well. If they want that back, they will get that back eventually. They're bringing in 300,000 additional men to reinforce the front lines. So you have to think about what that means versus what Ukraine is able to reinforce their front lines with. They've been running a deficit in trained manpower for a long time. The West has tried to drum up all of these training programs in Europe, but just the fact that you have to take Ukrainian men, send them out of the country to train and come back, that right there, do you see how much more complicated that is than just training them and sending them to the front line in Ukraine? But they can't, because any training center in Ukraine is going to be hit. So this is the problem they have when Ukrainian vehicles are damaged or heavy weapons are damaged. They have to ship them all the way to Poland. If you're fighting in the Donbas region, that's 1,000 kilometers one way and another 1,000 the other way, just to send it to get repaired and come back. So think about how impractical that is, and how long do you think Ukraine can continue doing that, especially with a lot of their rail apparently relying on electric traction. So they're out of electricity. So how are they going to be moving things around? They have a limited amount of diesel locomotives, and I'm sure that those will end up being targeted next. The fact that everything is going to be using diesel generators at essential infrastructure throughout the country, that's less diesel for your vehicles on the front line. So it's a huge problem that continues to compound as time goes by. From Russia's perspective, they have time. They're not the ones facing an economic and energy crisis. They're also not the ones facing a crisis in terms of material support. We see the Garan 2 drones. This is something that they just introduced in the middle of their ongoing military operation. They introduced them in the middle, and they have more of them coming. Does Ukraine have anything like that they can point to and say we have more of that coming as well? And the answer is no. They do not. So people have to be patient. They have to think about the big picture, not look at a specific part on the map. The Kharkov offensive, yes, they got all of this territory back, Ukraine did, but at what cost? And what is that territory doing for them now? Now they have all of this additional territory that they have to patrol it. They have to invest in holding it. They've got their troops stretched out even further, and they have less to supply them with. So what sense did that make, except to gain temporary political points?
Exactly.
Any other questions about Ukraine? Because I don't remember what all of your questions were.
Oh no, that's fine. I was going to agree with what you said, because when you play the long game, and this is war we're talking about, it's more important to look at the whole picture. If you lose lives and you lose equipment, that will affect you more than if you lose land. And you can gain land, you can lose land. It's all part of war. This has happened for centuries. When you're in a war, you lose land. But when you lose people, that is hard to replace. You cannot lose. You cannot just make someone out of thin air. Obviously, you need to go through a process, pregnancy, birth, and 18, 19 years of your life, and then you've got to train. And to lose a life is much more important to to a country, and also to lose equipment. If you have no people and you have no equipment, then it doesn't matter what land you have, you will lose that land eventually. And you just got to look at it in the long term. And I think Ukraine has been very stupid in having these offensive in Kherson, in Kharkiv, for very small gains. And what cost? If you're losing thousands of men per day, is it really worth it? I don't think so. And if you're losing so much equipment per day, is it really worth it? I don't think so. Sometimes. Go on. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say Ukraine is trading their army for territories.
Yeah.
So now you got the territory, but you have no more army left.
It makes no sense.
What's going to happen to that territory?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like there's no common sense in how these guys are running their military. I mean, there's no strategy, there's no war strategy, there's no common sense. They're just throwing lives, and they're throwing people at a problem that's not even there. Gaining these little territories is not going to make any difference whatsoever. There is no way you can beat Russia. And I know what the West is doing. They're trying to tell the Ukrainians, oh, you can win this war, don't worry, keep going, we're behind you, we'll keep sending you weapons, we'll keep doing this, we'll keep doing that, giving the Ukrainians a false sense of hope, and is killing them. These Ukrainians, they don't even realize that they are systematically being killed and destroyed. And one thing that did change the Russian strategy regarding blowing up infrastructure in Ukraine. Do you remember when the Crimean bridge got blown up, and there was Ukrainian people taking pictures with this massive stamp on the wall, and they were taking pictures, they were posting it on social media. And I was on Twitter that day, and Twitter actually blew up. There was people retweeting it, and it was trending. And it went right to #1 when it was trending, and people were smiling. People in Kiev were smiling, taking a picture in front of it. I think that was the turning point. I think Russia said, you know what, we're done trying to protect these people. They don't care about us. They're just making fun of us. So let's just kind of end this war. Because when you think about it, when you start blowing up infrastructure and certain things in Kiev, that costs money. So all of this money that the West is giving to Ukraine, all of that's going to be redirected into repairs and reconstruction. And especially when the power goes out, then you're going to obviously spend a lot of money to repair it. And this money, that means it's not going to go into the military. This money will be spent going on to repairing things rather than going onto the military. And I think that's their tactic going forward. They're going to try and bleed the West dry. They're going to carry on blowing up parts of Kiev, so lots of the money gets redirected to repairs and reconstruction, and less money goes into the military. And this money is just drying up day by day, week by week. It's becoming less and less. And Ukraine is not making any money. I mean, come on. I mean, there's hardly any businesses in Ukraine. Most people have left the country. The rest are fighting and killing themselves for a war that they're not going to win. It's quite saddening, Brian. What do you think about that?
Well, I think the attack on the infrastructure, and this is part of Russia's incremental escalation strategy. They could have done that on the first day.
Yeah.
The end of February, they could have went in and they could have just destroyed Ukraine's infrastructure. But this does not fit into the way Russia sees Ukraine, and this does not fit in to the way Russia would ideally like to solve this problem. But if Ukraine's leadership, if enough people are following that leadership, going along with it, and if the West continues supporting that leadership, then they have to escalate. They have to continue escalating. They're not going to do it all at once. Again, I've said this many times. A lot of people said Russia's calling it a special military operation, but it's an all-out invasion. It's a total war on Ukraine. Obviously, it wasn't, because if it was, they would have done that on the first day. It's very obvious. It's abundantly clear that Russia has the ability to continue escalating. There are other things they can do to escalate this conflict. There's other ways they can attack the infrastructure and really hurt Ukraine on a national scale that they're holding back from doing. They're doing it incrementally. And just like you said, with the hitting the Crimean Bridge and the possibility, the very high possibility that Ukraine, with the help of its Western sponsors, organized that and were involved in that. That just unties Russia's hands so that they can continue escalating until, just like you said, they are going to destroy the economy and everything coming into it, because it's being propped up by the West.
Yeah.
So the West is a black hole. It's turning into a black hole, sucking up all of the West's financial and military resources. We're watching that happen. And for these people to think that they're going to just turn around and then start some kind of war with China, it's just completely insane. I don't know what's going on anymore.
Exactly.
In Washington, London, Brussels.
It's crazy.
I don't
it's
think
crazy.
they know either.
No. What do you think about the U.S. troops or Western troops are in and around Kherson? Because I'm hearing stories that U.S. troops have landed in Ukraine and they are operating within Ukraine. What do you think about those stories? Could this be an
Ultimately,
escalation?
yeah. I mean, if they are operating, they don't want to. The U.S. is going to continue denying it if they are. If the U.S. is sending its troops in there knowingly, purposefully, these aren't private military contractors or something, or some loophole. They're just doing it covertly. Ultimately, I don't think it's going to make any difference. The problem that Ukraine and the U.S. and its allies have is they don't have the right type of military hardware to fight this kind of conflict. They simply don't. They did not invest in multiple launch rocket systems, artillery, air defense systems, everything that is being used in this conflict. They did not invest in that to the point where they would be able to even match Russia, let alone outmatch Russia. So I don't know what difference it's going to make. It's going to prolong the conflict, that is for sure. Even the support the U.S. is sending is going to continue to prolong it, but it's not going to change the outcome. It's just a matter of how many people they want to see die, and how much Europe is paying the price for this too, in all sorts of ways. The longer this goes on, the less and less is going to be left of Europe.
Exactly. So let's come to the end of the show. Do you have anything more to say? We just reached just over 2 hours. We've had a pretty good following today. Do you have any last words before we go, Brian?
Well, I just think people should look at what's going on in Ukraine, the way it was the U.S. who started this in 2014. I don't think that it was a coincidence that also in 2014, the U.S. was meddling heavily in China in the very same way, backing political opposition groups that don't reflect the best interests of the people living in China, and the Euro-Maidan, in not the best interests of the Ukrainian people. They're trying to maneuver these opposition groups into positions of power in Ukraine, in Taipei. They were trying to do it in Hong Kong, to create death and destruction, to create division, so that they can divide up their perceived adversaries and maintain hegemony over all of them. What is going on between the U.S. and Russia is the exact same thing that's going on between the U.S. and China. There is no difference. And it's not a coincidence that Russia and China are working together. A lot of people think that Russia is just working with China because they have no choice. As a matter of fact, they have a lot in common. A lot of the disagreements they've had in the past is in the past. We're not talking about the same Russia that existed during the Cold War. We're not talking about the same China that existed then. We're talking about two completely different systems that have evolved in major ways over the decades to where they are now, and they are on the same page and they're working together. They both genuinely believe in multipolarism, and they're working and fighting hard to make it a reality. So we have to look at this as a big picture. Not, again, I'm addressing the people who seem to understand what's going on in Ukraine, but somehow think that China is, I don't know what they think China is, but it's because they're buying into the Western propaganda regarding China while rejecting it regarding Ukraine and Russia. So this is, I think, is a huge problem that if more and more people could get past and understand the big picture here, I think the more beneficial it will be for all of us who are trying to speak up about this and trying to raise awareness and get people to resist this agenda.
Thanks for that, Brian. I completely agree with you. Will you come back again? I know it's been a very different kind of live stream today. We talked about different subjects that not many others are talking about. Sometimes it gets a bit boring just talking about Ukraine only or talking about China only. So we're trying something different here, talking about military aspects of it. I don't think there's any other channels that went as deep as we have regarding the Chinese military. And not many other Western military channels know that much about the Chinese military as well. They're just assuming China is the same as it was in the Korean War, for example, or the Vietnam War. But yeah, it's been very educational for me as well. Also listening to you, Brian, really appreciate it. So I think the viewers are asking, will you come again? Will you join us again in the future live stream?
Yeah, and we'll think of some other topic to dive into for next time.
Exactly.
And as always, AJ, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. I really appreciate the audience hanging in there. And so again, thank you.
No problem, Brian. I appreciate your time and appreciate you coming on. I want to thank all the moderators. I want to thank everyone that's been listening to us so far. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. And tune in again, guys. Don't forget to like and share, subscribe. You know what to do. Thanks, guys. See you soon.